Tonight on Frontline, they were just playing corporate hardball.
The company was growing, cash was flowing.
Squeeze and leverage suppliers.
But it got out of hand.
Cabinets stuffed with held checks, covering up $10 million.
Kept sinking deeper and deeper and deeper.
Frontline correspondent Paul Solman investigates how one high-rolling entrepreneur and his loyal followers covered up one of the largest corporate frauds in United States history.
Fool the auditors.
Cooked the books.
Tonight on Frontline, how to steal $500 million.
In Youngstown, Ohio, it's the fraud of the century. And they're still arguing as to how hometown hero Mickey Monas wound up losing $500 million of other people's money while building what seemed to be a retail empire, a discount chain called Phar Mor. Mickey Monas, crook or classic entrepreneur, depending on your point of view. The story of Phar Mor is a tale of fraud, one of the largest in American corporate history. But it's also a modern morality play, in which previously honest people, hired more or less at random, sustained the fraud for years. We'll show you how they did it. But you'll have to decide for yourself as to why, and why they were allowed to carry on by everyone in a position to stop them, from investors to the board of directors to the auditing firm of Coopers & Lybrand. But maybe the best question to ask as you watch the fraud unfold is simply this. What would you have done had you been a part of the juggernaut that was Phar Mor?
Some people in this world have one thing on their mind, deals.
In 1982, Monas opened his first Phar Mor, a deep discount store that sold everything from prescription drugs to shampoo, all at unbelievably low prices. A key to low prices was power buying, Monas's catchphrase for loading up when suppliers offered rock-bottom deals, thus creating far more savings for cost-conscious customers. The prices were so low, competitors couldn't figure out how Phar Mor did it. Monas looked like a winner to David Shapira, the Pittsburgh grocery executive who bankrolled the new venture and served as its CEO. Shapira had the credibility, Monas the gambling spirit. Strong sales at the first store so impressed Monas's bosses that a second store followed within 7 months. Within a year, there were 8. To help him build the new firm, Monas hired young men. Many of them lacked experience, but they made up for it in loyalty to the boss. To run accounting, he chose Pat Finn.
You could see yourself going after problems, challenging yourself, solving problems. In accounting, you work through a problem, there was a right answer and a wrong answer. Things were black and white. And that's probably part of my personality. Things are black and white. Things are either right or wrong.
To Pat Finn, the ethical calls had been easy until he met Mickey Monas, a man with a brash exterior but an inspiring ability to create jobs and make money.
He had the ability to motivate all of his, everyone who worked for him to have that same type of fire and that same type of dedication towards Phar Mor.
Monas used his growing reputation as a business prodigy to boost his hometown. He was often on the front lines at public celebrations, inviting people to believe in whatever enterprise he pushed, whether it was Phar Mor or a summer camp for local city kids.
He became almost like a cult figure. He really did. He was bigger than life. He was bigger than life. He could do no wrong. He had the Midas touch, however you want to say it. He was a very, very important person for the psyche of the Youngstown area.
Word of Monas's success spread quickly among local banks and investors, who in the recessionary days of the early 1980s were starved for fast-growing investment opportunities.
People looked upon Phar Mor as perhaps the greatest success story in the retail industry ever. I remember when Sam Walton from Walmart came out and made the announcement that the only company that he fears at all in the expansion of Walmart, his #1 competitor, is Phar Mor.
As it grew, Phar Mor found itself up against Walmart in mall after mall. In 1985, there were 12 stores. By 1987, 40. To win in the world of deep discount, you beat the other guy's price and hope to capture his customers. So, for the next 2 years, Monis committed Phar Mor to underselling Walmart. But the prices were so low, he began losing money in those stores. Pat Finn watched nervously as year by year the profit margins of the entire company eroded. By 1989, he realized Phar Mor now faced a loss of millions. Finn went to Monis with the bad news.
Mickey Monis was in a tough position. 5 years into running what had seemed a white-hot company in a sizzling industry, he was losing money. What were his options? He could announce the losses and risk losing his credibility, his credit, and quite possibly his company, or he could buy a little time by parking the losses temporarily and put more effort into improving efficiency, getting lower prices from suppliers, something that would enable him to turn a profit once again. Monis chose to buy time, according to his chief financial officer. Pat Finn states that when he brought the disappointing results to his boss, Monis simply crossed them out with a pen and wrote in higher numbers showing a profit. Now, this was illegal, but the report was mainly an internal document. Phar Mor was lying primarily to its owners.
You knew you were doing something wrong, but you never understood how wrong. I think he helped me believe that, starting it for him, I was being a team ball player. Give him time and he'll fix the problem.
The true numbers were kept in a separate set of books called the subledger, and Phar Mor's accounting manager, John Anderson, was brought into the plot to keep track of the temporarily altered figures.
It was really a report that Pat Finn wanted to keep track of so he can see where everything was at and what, problems he needed to cover.
Finn had hired Anderson directly out of Youngstown State University, where this kind of accounting presumably was not part of the curriculum.
Pat Finn always had an aggressive approach to accounting, and call it aggressive or call it creative, that's the way it was done ever since I remember.
Losses can be parked for a while, but eventually they need to be covered with something tangible. By Finn's account, Monis set out to cover the shortfall by putting the arm on Phar Mor's vendors. The merchandise show, where retailers and vendors haggle over the price of, say, a year's supply of strawberry kiwi juice. For years, the name-brand vendors had the power here. But the success of huge deep discount chains like Walmart and now Phar Mor had gradually tilted the balance. The chains were now big enough to muscle the suppliers. Monis's inspiration was to squeeze upfront payments from vendors in return for not selling their competitors' products. He'd use these exclusivity fees to cover his losses. Coca-Cola, for instance, paid Phar Mor $10 million to keep Pepsi out of Phar Mor for just 5 years. Vendors let themselves be strong-armed by a retail newcomer without ever wondering, it seems, if the Phar Mor phenomenon was for real. Meanwhile, Phar Mor's accountants used the millions in exclusivity fees to help offset the losses they were hiding, which had now reached $18 million. But the fees were not enough. Phar Mor wasn't Mickey Monis's only interest. He had invested in over a dozen other businesses and even had the moxie to take on the National Basketball Association. Monis's World Basketball League had a hook. No player was taller than 6'5", and the 9 teams were located in smaller markets, in cities like Youngstown. But in reality, things at Phar Mor were a mess. Even with the exclusivity money, the company was still facing a $12 million loss, and the auditors were coming. So how do you make a $12 million loss disappear?
Well, you can start by dividing it up into smaller amounts. $12 million divided by 129 stores comes out to $93,023 and about 25 cents a store. So you put that on the expense side of each store's ledger. And to make it balance, you need to add $93,023 and about 25 cents to each store's assets. Now, you can't claim cash you haven't got. Any auditor can see through that. But you can claim another category of assets. Your inventory is worth more than it actually is. And that's the first thing they did.
So Phar Mor claimed every 6-pack of Coke in the store was worth, say, $2.30, when in reality it may have sold for $1.98. Multiply that difference by thousands of six-packs of Coke in 129 stores, and you're on your way to a $12 million cover-up.
It's a whole new world facing today's chief executive. Competition is fierce.
But how could Phar Mor's respected auditors, Coopers and Lybrand, who sell themselves on their know-how, be so easily fooled? Especially since a good auditor checks the inventory while it's physically counted.
Now, you can't check all the inventory in every store. Moreover, Coopers, having won the Phar Mor account with a very low bid, wanted to limit its costs. So Coopers checked only 4 stores out of 129. And get this, Phar Mor found out from Coopers which locations would be checked months in advance. So when Coopers arrived to examine the stores, it's not too surprising that everything appeared to be in order.
We went to Coopers and Lybrand to ask them why they were unable to uncover the fraud.
An accountant is a watchdog, but not a bloodhound. An accountant cannot be expected to search out and find every piece of fraud. There's really a big difference between being a bloodhound and a watchdog, and I think that's an important distinction.
But perhaps a fair question is not whether Coopers was hired as a bloodhound, but whether the watchdog was asleep. With only a tiny sample to go by, Coopers accepted Phar Mor's inflated inventory figures year after year, even though Finn couldn't back them up with documents. In the end, the auditors not only bought Phar Mor's numbers, but declared that the company had actually earned a record profit. Monas was at home in the world of big bets and make-believe. He even built 3 stores in Las Vegas. Monas's activities would eventually be scrutinized by bankruptcy examiner Jay Alex.
The sense I have is like it was a boys' club. It was like a big boys' club is what it was, and they were having a great time, and the company was growing, and cash was flowing, and there were no rules and restrictions, and they were hot.
Losses were now more than $45 million and growing, but Monas refused to raise prices or retreat.
He just couldn't admit defeat. It's a flaw that he had. He just couldn't look himself in the mirror and say, hey, we made a mistake here. We got to fix it and we got to go on.